So good evening or good day or good whatever time of the day it is you are watching on YouTube. My name is Gill. I am one of Pentart's creatives and I have the pleasure of doing the Thursday live this week. Now then, let me just find the link so I can then do some social media activities. There we are. And then we can get started. There we are. Click that. Then I can do this, and then I can come into here. Hopefully, I will pick up the comments from people as we go live. No, I don't want to go onto my TV because that's in a completely different room. There we are. That can go onto there. I'll get rid of my glasses because I don't need them for this. And then we can go from there. I thought we would do something a little bit different tonight. Oh, me do something different, controversial. I know. However, sometimes it's good to do something different. I'm going to be using my beloved Pentart mediums, but we're actually going to make a mixed media card instead. So and I've got several different ideas, so we'll just see where we get to in terms of time for everything this evening. And I have got some bits pre-packed, and we are going to be using the Daisy collection, which is standing on all sorts of gubbins. Let's move that out of the way, which is the latest Stamperia release. Now, what I would say is if you're going to be using mixed media techniques on your cards, then start out with some really nice quality cardstock. Don't try adding wet mediums onto ordinary paper because they'll warp, and you will be able to straighten them out. But if you start out with some really nice, thick, decent card, you can hear just how hard that is, then it'll be much better for you overall. So let me just start by doing, we're going to start with background, and then we'll go from there. So this is a beautiful stencil, hence the name of the collection, Daisy, or the Live Daisy. And this is KSTDQ 130. There we are. And it comes from from an 8-inch card blank, so it will just about perfectly fit my 8-inch stencil. But if I don't do something to anchor it, then we'll have an almighty mess. I didn't particularly want to add glue, so this is just some masking tape that can go onto there. And I'll pop the one on the bottom, being careful not to do that. As I say, I have got some of these some pieces pre-dried to make life a bit easier, because I didn't really want to. Partly because I thought we'd use some mediums that maybe we don't see used very often, and definitely use them in a different way. So there we are. And if we're doing this, then I totally recommend that you use a significant amount of masking tape, and that you just do anchor your piece properly down so that you don't have lots of bubbles. I can feel that this is bubbly on this side, so I can lift this up. I can lift that up from there. I can re-anchor, re-push that down, and re-pop that on so that is flat and properly flat onto there. And we're going to start with a very simple concept. And then we're going to add layers and embellishments using all sorts of different Pentart mediums. And as I say, I've got several different things prepped, but we'll see where we get to in the time allowed. I would recommend that you get a reasonably big scraper. I prefer plastic ones to metal ones for this, but really, yeah, a metal one will work if that's what you've got. These are from a Stamperia Effective tool set, and this is the Pentart modelling paste as opposed to the modelling paste light. I guess both would work, but there we are. So we're just going to pop some of that onto the edge of there, and that's going to allow me then to pop that on and pull it down and pull it down, and then I can come back and fill in the spaces, because I can see that I've got areas where I haven't got a nice coverage. But by doing this, hopefully I can see, yeah, see, I'm going to pop a bit down there because that's the area that I've missed, and I've got a nice smooth surface. If I try this with just a palette knife, I'm likely to dig in to my piece rather than and end up with an uneven layer. So that's why my choice has been to use the flat scraper. So I'm going to lid that, pop that over there, and then peel off gradually. And by doing this, you could, in the order that you put the tape on, you can then end up with a hinge. You can save these pieces of tape. Oops, sorry, she says, and use them again, because the tape, the gubbins will dry, and then you can just use them again. So let's just lift that over there, lift that off there, pop that onto there. If I take this bottom one off, tuck that to the side, hopefully that, and then if I want to, I can now hinge this up and see what I've got, make sure I have full coverage, and get rid of that when I want to. And I'm now going to pop that piece down on the floor by my fan heater, which you can hear, so it can dry, because I have some pre-prepared. Let's just clean that. So the modelling paste is a nice smooth paste, and you don't have to use it completely white. You can mix in any of the Pentart pigment paste, so to have any colour that you want, which is also a great reason for having a neutral background. They will be pastel colours, but and that's globally what we're looking for most things, isn't it? Anyway, so let's just take that off there, peel that off there, and just make sure that I have given my stencil a nice clean, get rid of the extra paste. I have had black paste through this, which has not helped matters, so my stencil is a dirty grey, but hey ho. There we are. Okay. Now, one of the joys of making things for yourself is that you can pre-colour. Let me just straighten that lining. There we are, that's better. You can colour your products to suit what you want. So I know on my card I want a base layer. So I'm just going to spridge out some paint. I haven't got any resin pieces today. I know, no resin pieces, but then I think they're maybe a bit heavy to go on cards. I thought I would just do something that was a bit different, because we are all guilty of buying stuff and pigeonholing it into a into I can only do this with this. So these are just some matte acrylics. This one is in mint, this one is in mojito, and I'm going to pick up some chalky paint. As I say, use what you have. in ivory, because I think that's just going to add some softened colours to my overall piece. And we're going to go lazy when it comes to painting. We're going to pick up some of this and we're just going to paint it over. I just want a background edge on this piece. I don't need it to be all the whole piece to be coloured, because actually you're only going to see part of it. So why waste product when you don't need it? So that will give us our mat for our piece. Very simple, and because I've used the paints that I'm going to use throughout, it means that that mat is absolutely going to coordinate with everything else I make, she says, with sticky fingers. So, oh, that wasn't the right one to pick up, that was the wet one. So I now have a piece of card that has, yeah, if I angle it, this has my dried modelling paste on it, and I don't need it to be the full size. So this is 8x8. That is, the base piece was 8x8. So I'm actually just going to trim this down by a little bit. I might put a white layer in as well. So I can now take off my edges. So all I'm going to do is take off an edge. That gives me a straight edge to work from. There we are. So I'm just trimming this down. So that, yeah, I reckon if by the time we go for that, and then we'll just see what it looks like. I might want to add just a little bit more. So let's take this down to 6.5 inches. Yeah, 6.5 inches. I think that will allow me perhaps to add a white mat to define my layers. So if I pick up, that's my base piece. That's that. I'm actually going to take it down to 6 and add a white base layer. So let me just take off another bit off 2 sides. Actually, let's go 6.25. There we are. 6.25. 6.25. I can always trim it again if I want to. That's also just fine. So 6.25. 6.25. There we are. So that is a piece of card that I has the modelling paste that I've put through it, and I've just left it to go dry, which is always a good move, particularly when you're going to add more wet mediums onto here. I'm going to take a bit more of that mint colour and a bit more of that mojito. So bright, zingy, spring-like colours, a bit of blue for contrast, and then some white added in. And then we're just going to pick up and use a similar technique. Now, because this is now textured, it will be more difficult to paint with baby white, but it's not impossible. So I'm deliberately picking up all 3 colours. We'll swoosh it around. So I've got all 3 colours on here, and this will allow me to, and I'm tapping it in. So I'm getting a real mixture of colours on here. Some blues, some greens, some softer colours. So simple, easy, no skill required. And I'm just making sure that I've popped it in, got it into the nooks and the crannies in there. And that's just giving me lots of different texture. Now, at this point, there are 2 options, okay? So I've got, still difficult to see that texture, but because of this, I can still see some white areas. So let me just push that in to the bases, because my daisies are not showing up very well. So if I now just gently across that surface, because I've got texture, I can now take off that top layer And now you can see all of that beautiful texture on there. Okay, because it's the paint is now in the recesses, so that's an option to there. The alternative option is just, it's the same colours, just a different density of colour, is to let it all dry and then just take a sanding block So this is a technique that will just give you lots and lots of variety in your makes. And use the products that you've got. The modelling paste is perfectly robust enough, as you can see, for me to take a sanding pad to and take off that top layer. So you can see where it's working. So it's just a different way of getting a slightly different look, but using the same products. Okay. So we'll just take this, and then we'll make a decision about what we're going to do. I might put this one onto it. So not needing masses of elbow grease, but just a little bit, and gentle is better than too rough when it's like anything in this world. You can just carry on working at that until I've got the layer off that I want, but it's going to give you a different effect. So let's just mop up all of that wet, or all of that powder, and get rid of that paint. So I've chosen colours that I think work with the collection, but that's given me a base layer and then some different layers for adding in. Okay, so let's just build this. I definitely want another layer onto there. So let me just, she says, I've clearly got yuck on the floor because I can feel my feet are sticking to it, which is always helpful. So that textured layer is a 6.5, 6.25, because we cut it down to 6.25. So let's just cut this to 6.5. It's going to give you just a tiny white border, and I'm deliberately using really good quality cardstock here. Okay. I'm actually cutting up card blanks, if truth be known. Okay, so we've got a base, and that can be mounted onto a card, and then that can go onto there. So I'm going to choose to layer that, she says, because she knows she had it out a minute ago. Where did I put it? I put out some foam tape. Of course, can I see my foam tape? Yes, I can now see my foam tape. But you could use some leftover pieces of card. Use what you have. This is, double-sided foam tape, and I can layer it up. So I'm just going to pop some of this onto here. Let me find a pair of scissors. So simple, easy, not complicated, but because you've used your own products, you've then clearly got everything that's going to coordinate for you. We will do a little bit more extra embellishing with everything as we go. So I like to have my cards with dimension. If it's, but that's my choice. If you're going to be obviously posting it, and postage is ridiculously expensive nowadays, then obviously maybe cut down some of the layers so that you don't have quite so much. And please support the middle. I'm not going to, so don't do what I'm doing. And then we're going to pop that into there. Now, to make life easy and to give yourself a little bit of wriggle room, I'm just going to add hello, Juliana. a little bit of glue on top of my foam tape, and I'm doing that deliberately because it will mean that if I don't get this in the exact spot I want, I've got some wriggle room, and long term it's going to reinforce the piece, the glue, because glue on tapes has a habit of misbehaving. So there we are, we have a matte and a layer, and we've used paint and glue so far. So now we're going to I'm going to pop this piece onto here to build up another layer. So this is our modelling paste layer, and again I'm going to add depth because that's my preference when I'm making cards. But as I say, you do you use some leftover packaging if that's easier. I've deliberately chosen white tape because it's just going to allow me it's not going to be so obvious from the edge of my piece. There we are. That can go onto there, that can go onto there, that can go there. And that's one quick way of using up half a roll of tape, so I'll need to remind myself to order some more there. And of course, just because I'm doing this as a card, because again that's my preference, but this would equally look quite nice ultimately in a little shadow box frame. So just because it is a card, and I'm using my my products that I have, doesn't mean that you can't make it as a gift. You could give the card and a frame and let the recipient put it into is there a right, is there a wrong? Probably not. So it's just going to give me just a little border all the way around, and it's going to help that layer to really pop off there. So now then, what are we going to do? Well, it needs some embellishments, doesn't it? It really does. So let me, she says, clear the mess that I have on the floor. We've got all sorts. We really do have all sorts lurking because that's what we do. We might need a bit more than that. So I have, let me just grab some bits and pieces, lots of bits and pieces. Got some hessian, some linen, ephemera, the die cuts, some washi, some ephemera, paper pad. So I'm just going to pop these bits off to the floor where I can hopefully grab them easily. I've got some leaves as well and some faux greenery. So this is the junk journal book, and the paper in here is definitely quite a lot thicker. It's more card than it is in the ordinary paper pad, which is great. And there's A4 paper pages, and we've got some stickers which we might come back to. We've got tags and cut apart elements, and I have pre-chosen some of them, but I'm just thinking, well, I am just going to change my mind because that's a girl's prerogative, isn't it? Of course it's a girl's prerogative. So let's just take this piece out of here, and yeah, that one's going to work, isn't it, with the daisies on it. So let me just cut out here. As I say, we're using some of our pieces as backgrounds. There we are. So sometimes it's easier to cut with a pair of scissors than it is a trimmer. But these colours will pick out the greens and the blues that I've chosen for that background. And we're just then going to build a little assemblage of products to make our card up. There we are. And I'm going to go on the wonk because why wouldn't I? And these little bits that I've just chopped off, we'll use those for something. Honestly, we will. So let me just give this, because I tend to like a scrabbly outcome, a little bit of a distress. I've got white already in my card base, so adding some white from the depth of my card isn't going to be a problem. And then we'll build a piece. Okay, so I'm going to add that, but I want it up a bit, and then we're going to tuck in. This is from the collection, from that junk journal pad, and it doesn't matter, but it's good. We're going to tuck that into there, and I wanted a title. And as I say, I'm not going to ink these edges, partly because we've already got we've got colour in, because we've got the white already into here. Okay, so that's why I'm not going to add that in. I'm going to pop. Now then, I know I had another flower out at some point, but clearly maybe it's gone walkabouts, but that's not a big problem. Okay, so let me just grab a little bit of ribbon from behind me. Okay, so we're just going to, I could add string, that might work. Let me grab, let's see what a piece of string might look like. Have we got some string conveniently to hand? Of course we've got string conveniently to hand. There we are. So let's just take this, fold that in half. It's skinny string, so let me just pop that through here. So I've made a loop. I'm going to pop this through, grab those tails and pop it through. Now if I leave it like that, they have a habit of untying, so let me just give myself a little knot there, into there. There we are, and pop that there and get rid of the ends, and we're going to repeat that for the other one. Okay. So we're just making up an embellishment collection, having made our background piece, and this means that you could maybe buy the junk journal collection, and you don't need to buy a huge pack of 12 by 12 papers or 8 by 8 papers. You can then just pick, you can make your own background pieces for yourself, and that solves the problem of them needing to have everything in a collection, because much as it's obviously nice to be able to afford to buy a whole collection, it really does add up. And in the current day and age, I think we just have to be mindful of that. Okay, so, and then we've got these two pieces also came from the collection. So let us just do a little bit of adding and messing around, and I've got some lace here, so we might well add some lace onto this, and my title is there, and then we're going to do some extra bits and pieces when I know what space I have left to add to my background pieces, if that makes sense. So because I don't want that on flat, I want some texture. I actually have my glue gun hopefully heated up. Yeah, so I'm just going to add some glue here, pop that there, that can go there. So it's just going to give me texture and depth, and this will allow me to do this without having to add masses and masses and masses and masses and masses of 3D gel or even extra pieces onto it. So let me just add a glob of glue here. I can always come back in, so if I don't attack, oh dear, so I think I've now managed to break my glue gun, so which is not very helpful. There we are. So we'll push that through. Well, there we are. That always happens over time, I find, with glue guns. And I can pop that onto there like that. And I'm aware that it's not all stuck down, and that's cool. Okay, so let me just pop that onto there, and I'm going to lift that one up with some of that pesky 3D tape. It's just quicker than using a 3D than heavy body gel at this point. And I might actually need to add 2 layers of this because I've got depth already. I might not, because it's going to allow me to tuck things in underneath. There we are. So I've got space under there. I can add more if I want to, or I can tuck it down. There we are. So I want my sentiment to sit here. So that also needs to have a little bit of additional support. And I might go up 2 layers. I know, shock, horror, why? But there we are. But that's what we're going to do. And that's the joy. So let me just pop these into here. There we are. We'll build up our depth. There we are. Okay. So that now builds up. So I've got a nice amount of depth, and I'm wanting to stick an extra flower there. But clearly I'm going to use, I will cover half of that. So I'm going to chop it into 2, and I'm just going to give that a little bit of a helping hand shape and tuck it under there. So let me just grab my broken glue gun, because that's clearly a good move in the day and age. And let's just pop some glue into there. There we are. I can press on the glue stick, pop that out of the way. You could use heavy body gel for doing this. It gives you a bit more wriggle room. It's always a good idea. That's going to add a little bit of something there, and we'll see what I want to do with that. I think I might add another. I think I prefer it tucked under there. Yep. So I'm just going to give that a little bit of a tilt again. Pop a little bit of glue on there. Oh, she says, dropping it, because that's always good. Tuck that under there, under there, under there. So I've got myself some depth and some dimension, and I might just want a little bit of lace. And because I've left myself some layers, I can then stick these pieces in as I want. So there we are. That's the joy of not having glue every which way. And I am just going to pop a little bit of my normal express glue into there and under there, because that's just, and then hold it down, because it's just going to sit in there neatly. And I might just take a little bit more of that lace, and I'm just going to tuck it under there, because it's just going to add an extra layer to my piece. So we've got modelling paste, paint, lace, pretty pictures. Let me just hold that down. There we are. So is that very mixed media-y? Possibly not, but it's a starting place. Okay. And we've got those pieces up there, so that works quite nicely. I want that to be sitting down a bit better than that. So let me just add some glue there and just give that a few seconds to grab whilst we wait. So here we are. We've got our sentiment, we've got our background, we've got our flowers. Okay. Oh, she says. There we are. We just need to leave that to grab. And then we want to add some extra pizzazz, I think. Pizzazz, is that ever such a word? I think it is, isn't it? Pizzazz. So in the Pentart range, we have micro beads, And we have glitters, eco glitters, which is obviously a good move. Let's just stick that in there for the moment. Okay. So if I just add onto the center of those flowers a little swirl of that, this little swirl of that, there we are. I can now, and these will go every which way, ladies. I can promise you they'll go every which way. So just be aware that that's what will happen if you're not very careful. So let's just grab another card, because that will make my life much easier. Okay, so I can now take a few micro beads. These come in lots of different collections, and add those into the piece. And I'm deliberately not covering all of that. You see, they go every which way. I knew that would be a bad move. That's why you don't see me using them very often. And the glitter's going to do the same. Of course it is, because why wouldn't it? Okay, so we've added a little bit of extra detail into here. And we're going to add just a little bit of the glitter also into there. There we are. And I will tap that off over a bin. So I've now got sparkly centres with lots of added texture, all using Pentart products, all with relatively simple activities, nothing uber complicated, but all designed to give you some extra detail. So this one is 3D varnish. Now then, I don't want blue. Of course I don't want blue. Let me see if I can get this to come out, because this bottle has been open for longer than it should be. There we are. Let's get rid of that blue plug with my favoured pen. And if this is okay, so this is 3D glue, 3D varnish. It will go on white, but it will dry clear with some texture, because I'm going to add some texture, but give you some extra depth just to that word. So the word will dry area of that will then become shiny and clear when it dries over time, which is cool, I reckon. And then I want something that's going to link all of those layers together, and maybe I should have done that before this bit, before I popped the 3D stuff on, but hey ho. Right, let's find my favourite splatter brush. Now, I tend to have white pre-mixed paint already in a pot, but white I think is going to be a little bit too stark for my spatters. So that is just some of the Ivory Deco Paint Soft and some water. I'll pop those over there. Okay, and now I can just add a few splatters. Doesn't need to have lots. And yes, I have got some on the work on that. There we are. So we have used all of the mixed media techniques. So paint, paste, layering, some shimmer, and some extra bits that you don't see me using very often to make a bespoke card that would equally go into a shadow box frame without any problems. Okay. So it's taken 40 minutes to do one card. Hey ho. So that now needs to dry. As I say, that can go onto a card base, and we've got our mixed media base, all custom coloured using the paints that I think work with the collection and layering up all of our products. Now then, that one is wet, so let's pop that over that, not at that wonky jaunty angle, because that will send that flying over. Right. Now then, I have another piece of paper from the collection that is shiny. Okay. Why is that shiny? I hear you all asking. Well, again, this is a piece of paper from the junk journal collection. So I take my stencil down and I've put the heavy body gel glossy through, and this goes on that yucky white colour but dries completely transparent, and that is going to allow me to have a resist. So let me just grab a card blank and decide what size I want to work with, because as ever it's easier to work with what we've got, and if we add colour onto that, we can then customize it. So I think this is just in centimetres, will probably be, so it's 12.5 centimetres by 17.5 centimetres, all there around. So I am going to cut this to 12.5 by 12 by 17, I think. And I know I've got a little bit of trimming to do at the end. So there we are. Let's just do a little bit across there. So this piece of paper's got beautiful floral details at the bottom. I do need to cut off that edge because the stenciling does not go right up to the edge. There we are. And this is why I dried everything. There we are. So I want you to be, well, you're not going to be 17, you're going to be 16.5 by 12 and 11.5 then. So let's go 11.5. So I'm taking off a centimetre basically off the piece. So I've got a border all round. There we are. And you're thinking, well, you're telling me I've got that stuff on there. It's not very obvious you've got stuff on there. So this is like the Joseph's coat of many colours technique. Now then, I do have, because the glossy medium is going to act as a very nice resist for me. Okay, so I can now take my brown ink pad, and you think you're mad, you're covering everything. And I'm deliberately using a water reactive ink pad here, not my permanent one. Okay. And I've deliberately chose a background that really didn't have very much. Now, if you were doing this as a true Joseph coat of money colours, you would use black. But I think for this collection, black is just a bit harsh. And you definitely want an ink that will remain water reactive so that you can clean it off the top. There we are. So now the ink is now sitting in the base of there, in those areas. And I can now take a wet wipe and lift that off the top. And now the text, I've got a shiny surface, and the text that's in that paper background is still there. So let me just clean that off there a little bit better. There we are. So that is going to give us our layer. Now, I might just want to link in my card. So let's just add a little bit of that brown ink. So we're sticking to those, which is a Stamperia ink from the Vicky Papineau collection. I think there's several of them available. As I say, it's a water reactive ink, and then I can pop that onto there. So that is a different technique using the same stencil. And of course, you can do these techniques with pretty much any stencil you have. There we are. We'll get rid of the top. She says, having got varnish on her 3D varnish on her hands and everything else. Let's get rid of that. Yes. And we're going to use that same technique with the express glue. We're just going to use that. It will help support the card long term, and it will give me some wriggle room if I don't get it in place. So it's a really useful technique to have. Okay. So they say that is the glossy gel medium, heavy body gel, with a take on Joseph's coat of many colours. And that now obviously gives me a background that looks very, very different to my first background. And then I can start to again build some layers. So I've chosen some extra pieces, and let's come back to that paper pad. Let me just, I do have the pocket paper pad in front of me, so let's just see if I can find something that I prefer in here. They're too big. Now we'll go back to the other one because we can. And I think we're just going to take this one out of here. And then we can choose some other embellishments along the way. So I'm mixing things up. I'm using what I've got. I'm keeping things reasonably similar. I'm using the same products and hope, in terms of papers and stencils, but showing just how different changing up your base medium can be from the modelling paste to the glossy gel medium. So it's a very different look, and all of the details that's in that paper are still there, visible. And they say the key is to use a water reactive pad of paper, not to choose one that isn't. So I'm just going to ink these edges. Actually, I'm going to take that down another layer. It's just a little bit too big for my liking. And yes, that's going to give me some little strips. That's okay. They won't get, they'll get used to something, almost certainly. Even if it is just little layers to tuck in on a scrapbook page or in an photo album. There we are. It's just, I think, going to be a slightly better side by taking off that blue border. And that's, of course, the joy of being a creative. You can do what you want then, can't you? So we're just going to give those a little edge with that. And I'm deliberately using inks today. I could, you've seen me in the past use the Surgels as an alternative edging material, and that will also work quite nicely. This is, I've just pulled these out from the die cut collection, the junk journal pad. That little one says thank you. Got a little envelope, because who doesn't need a thank you card from time to time? I think we often do, don't we? Okay, so let's just pop some of these pieces together. There we are. So let's start with some added layers, because we can. And I do think that one of the things we do, you know, is forget that our mixed media products can be used for our card making. We're very good, I think, at, well, I know I'm guilty of using lots of rice papers and lots of layers of decoupage and things, but this way we've got, you know, just our basic, our products, our go-to products, just being used slightly differently. And that's always, I think, you know, if you can get more, use your products for more than one thing, then that's, again, I think is quite a useful thing to be able to do. Yeah. And definitely with this being a slippy, shiny background, I definitely need some extra oomph for holding it. So we're going to pop that deliberately a little bit higher. There we are. That can go onto there. Let's just pop that on a piece of tape. It doesn't have to be complicated. So one piece of tape, one knot. So that's going to sit down. That will sit that little bit higher for me. I can pop this one onto here, and I'm going to use that same technique. Gel medium, again, your heavy body gel will help with doing that, because it again will help lift it up, you know, for you, and you can add more dimension to your piece. But you don't need to be complicated. There we are. So I'm going to pop that into there. Okay. So thank you can go there. And I think I want that to pop a bit more off the page. So I have, she says, in amongst the mess on the floor, a piece of hessian. And I clearly need a piece that's going to be big enough to hold that. Let me go this way, and I can chop it down. So I'm just going to chop myself out a piece from here, and then we'll do a little bit of fraying and a little bit of trimming, because why not? There we are. That's going to help. So let's just have a little bit of a raggedy edge, and then we'll go from there. It's a bit too big at the moment, but that's fine. I can always trim off ends. There we are. There we are. So let's just give this a little bit of a haircut. It doesn't have to be quite so big. Let's straighten that up. There we are. Still too big. So let's just take another one of those off and give that a better haircut. There we are. So that can go there. So it says thank you. I'm going to grab my gel medium, she says, which isn't. Oh, well, I might as well use my heavy body gel glossy, because that's out, because this will act as a glue. It will appear glossy, but that's fine. There's enough glossy on the rest of it, so it's not going to be a problem. So I'll just pop some of this onto there. We'll add a little bit of depth. Pop that there. And I'm using the gel medium because it's just going to give me, it's going to stick into all of that texture better than if I used an ordinary glue. That can go there, that can go there. let's tidy up the mess because we've got too many bits lurking around the system. Okay. And that's still, to my brain, looking emptier than I would like, because I'm a finicky lady who likes texture. Because why wouldn't I like texture? So let's just add some extra bits. So let's just pop some of that onto the bottom of there. So this is just a piece of plastic floor. There we are. And I'm going to pop that one into there. So I'm now using my mixed media products as a glue, which you've seen me do masses of times when I've been making products. I do like things in threes. And the joy of the gel media. I'm going to chop that down. It's too big. There we are. And if I lift that up, that can sit into the gel medium down there. Okay. So we've got some bits there. She's really, I do have an awful lot of mess on my floor. And let's just grab, because we can, a rub-on or two. There we are. And I'm going to pop that there. So where is my, so this might be a challenge because I have foam tape under there. But a little bit of a wriggle, a little bit of persistence, we'll get there. There we are. So we can use our rub-ons, tuck them in. That works quite nicely, I think. There we are. See what else we've got. Do I want anything else? Why not? Why not add? Because we can. A little butterfly into there. There we are. Okay. So we've got a little thank you card there to go with our love card. And again, it wouldn't be me, would it? No, it really wouldn't be me without a bit of splatter. And I definitely don't want cream for this splatter. So there will be, because you can have splatters in any colour you want, some brown splatter. There we are. So same principle. We've got our paint. We'll add in a clean hand as opposed to a mucky hand. We'll add in some water because we've got way too much there. Of course we have. We'll take our splatter brush. We'll add in just a few splatters just to link our layers together. That will work there. Right. And do I want a little bit of glitter? Yeah, I do want a little bit of glitter. But I want it in a very controlled way. I could add some art stones. They would work. would fit quite well with this. But I just want to add a little bit onto those leaves. So I'm just going to take some foam, some of that glue, just pop it onto those plastic pieces. Don't mind it coming onto some of the other bits. Oh yeah, I don't particularly want that on there. But I can go onto the edge of the card. There we are. And then let's just add in right, let's just grab another card. Right, not that these. Yeah. And when it's dry, I can then brush off the excess, of which there's some sitting on there from a static point of view. There we are. Let's just get rid of that. Get rid of that. I can go back in the pot. I've got a nice soft brush. Don't want it on there. There we are. So I've now got a glittery, sparkly thank you card. So ladies, we are just approaching 7 o'clock this evening. So that is an hour of a live stream. I've got other things prepped, but I'm not going to make them. We'll use those and I'll do them on an alternative occasion. Let me just grab that first card. And then, so this evening, we've used one stencil with different products to produce 2 different cards from the same collection, which have a very different feel and look to them. The modelling paste with paint, modelling paste and paint and sanded back, I could have used that just as well. And the glossy matte heavy body gel, which dries clear for the coat of Joseph coat of 1,000 colours. And then we've added in some microbeads, some glitter, the Pentart Express glue, some inks and some paints. So hopefully I've convinced you that you can take your mixed media products and create yourselves usable, beautiful cards or pieces that will go in a frame, depending on what you want to do. So I'm going to end the live here for tonight. I will make a few more pieces up and then ultimately post them. But for now, please take care, look after yourselves, be kind to yourself and to your fellow humans. And I hope to see you online soon. Bye.